Hello. So we're on part 19 of our book Posted. We're starting a new chapter today. This chapter is called The Rules, and it's on page 184. Bench's favorite color was orange. This is probably not something I should know. Maybe if we had been friends since kindergarten, or were a couple of fourth graders swapping one of those secret password journals you can find in the bargain section of the bookstore. But it's not something that just came up naturally in conversation until I went into his bedroom for the first time and saw his tangerine walls and his blinding bright orange bedspread, making me wonder how he ever managed to get to sleep at night. I know other things about Bench, things that even his parents probably don't, like he's a little ashamed of his dad because Mr. Jones used to be a runner, track, and cross country, and now he carries a serious gut and can barely huff it a mile. I also know Bench is still terrified of letting his dad down, which is one of the reasons he tries so hard to get straight A's and make it onto every team. I know that it takes him twice as long to get through a book as me. I know that he has an irrational fear of his teeth falling out due to the fact that when he was little, his grandmother's dentures accidentally came loose and dropped into her potato soup. I know that he hates it whenever Dee Dee shouts, "For the Shire!" which is more often than necessary. And I know now that even though he never came out and said it, even though he always seemed cool about it, he never liked his nickname. Because let's face it, nobody wants to spend their life just sitting around waiting for their chance to get into the game. We were playing at Wolf's this time. His dad was gone all weekend for a conference, which meant the house would be quiet for a change. We usually played at Dee Dee's, but Wolf pointed out the injustice of making Dee Dee's parents foot the bill for snacks every time. Everything they say about teenage boys and their appetites is true. We once polished off an entire family-sized pack of Oreos in one night. 48 cookies, minus the crumbs, on Mrs. Paddle's linoleum. Dee Dee was the only one who couldn't keep his dozen down, scrambling for the toilet to make a deposit. These were the kinds of stories we kept to ourselves. I showed up to Wolf's early, eager to get out of my own house and away from Mom, who was on the phone with the lawyer discussing alimony. She and Dad never talked to each other directly. They would email or text if absolutely necessary. She had no problem yelling at her lawyer, though, so I said I'd just bike the 3 miles to Wolf's house. When I got there, his mom was trying to finish raking the front yard before it got dark. Hardly any leaves had fallen yet, but Mrs. Thompson was finicky about her lawn. Every hedge perfectly trimmed, every tree pruned. The grass had those diagonal mow lines that you usually only see on golf courses. She asked me how I was doing, how was school, the usual. She asked about Mom. She didn't ask about Dad. Nobody ever asked about Dad. I had hoped that Wolf would be practicing so that I could listen, but I spotted him in the garage instead. He was working on a plastic model of the battleship Arizona, the one that you could still see sunk at Pearl Harbor. I could smell the glue from the doorway. Piano was Wolf's passion, but he was almost as obsessed with those plastic kits. When he wasn't stuck to his bench pounding out Beethoven, he was snapping pieces together, making sports cars or fighter jets that would take up the shelves in his bedroom, the ones that didn't need to hold piano awards because those were all downstairs. He had Mustangs and F-15s and a German U-boat. He had a model of the Star Trek Enterprise and the Apollo lunar module. I remember the first time he showed me his room. It was like walking into a museum with fighter planes hanging from the ceiling and an aircraft carrier, also called the Enterprise, extending past both sides of his dresser. I'd never built one of those kits before. I would have glued my fingers together. Besides, I didn't have Wolf's patience. The first time I accidentally broke something off, I'd probably just toss the whole thing in the trash. Dee Dee texted. "He's on his way," Wolf said, sensing me standing there. I nodded and walked around the garage until I spotted Wolf's brother moped. I spotted Wolf's brother's moped moped, half covered in black tarp. Everybody's known for something. Wolf's older brother Simon was known for that bike, a Tai 150cc cherry apple, given to him as a consolation prize for the same time Wolf got the shiny black Baldwin sitting in the living room. Simon had just started middle school at the time, and Wolf said that everyone thought the moped was the coolest thing ever. Then Simon went to high school with juniors and seniors who drove things on 4 wheels that could actually hit the speed limit, and the moped suddenly wasn't so cool anymore, which explained why it sat in the corner of Wolf's garage. Your brother ever planning on selling this thing, I asked. Wolf shook his head, fidgeted with a rudder. Are you kidding? He still loves that bike. He says I can have it when I turn 14, provided I give him $100. He still lets me ride it sometimes, though, if I clean his room and put away his laundry. I lifted the tarp a little. The bike looked like it was still in good shape. I'd probably clean Simon's room for a chance to take it around the block. Does he ever let you take it out on the highway? You know, open her up, full throttle? I didn't even know if you could open up a moped. Wolf laughed. Dude, full throttle on that thing is about 50, and that's if you're going downhill. Uphill, you still have to hop off and walk it. He carefully put a radar dish in place, stepped back to admire his work. Did you hear anything from Bench? He said it casual, like he didn't care about the answer either way. Maybe he didn't, but I doubted it. It had been my job to call Bench and make sure he knew about tonight. It was 3 hours before he called me back. He said he couldn't make it. He's going out to dinner with his family to celebrate last night's game. The catch, Wolf said. The catch, I repeated. The catch had actually made the paper. Local sports page, local paper, and only a 2-paragraph article, but Bench's name was mentioned. A miraculous 40-yard catch and run by Jeremiah Jones, coming off the bench to seal the victory to the Falcons. I was sure his parents had already clipped it and framed it. I kept our copy of the sports section, just in case. I sensed there was something else Wolf wanted to say about the catch, but instead he just screwed the cap back on the glue and began putting the rest of the unused pieces back in the box. The battleship was still only half finished. It was in need of more guns and a whole lot of paint, but it looked pretty good. Wolf's work always did. His loss, Wolf said. I'm sure he can tackle anything that pathetic excuse of a dungeon master throws at us. Just for that, I'm adding more zombies. We'd both turned. Dee Dee stood in the driveway, an overstuffed Avengers backpack threatening to topple him backward. Your mom says if we bag those leaves, we get pizza. I smiled and nodded. I'm not sure what Mr. Thompson's problem was. Seemed to me like Mrs. Thompson knew the way straight to a man's heart. We went out to bag leaves. Afterward, Wolf's mom ordered an extra-large pepperoni and promised to leave us alone for the rest of the evening, retreating to her bedroom to enjoy some quiet time, which Wolf translated for us as reading mystery novels and stalking people on Facebook. We thanked her for the pizza and promised not to break anything. How's it going? I whispered to Wolf as his mother padded upstairs. She's been happy today, Wolf said with a shrug. I like it when they're happy, even if it's only one at a time. I didn't bother to say that with me, it was always one at a time. He was right, though. A happy one was better than a miserable two most days. While we waited for the pizza, Dee Dee unzipped his backpack and pulled out the library of manuals he'd brought, complete with maps and traps and cardboard tokens representing everything from zombie rats to vampire lords. He unloaded a small hoard of dice that skittered across the table. Wolf and I picked up a handful and challenged each other for the highest number. Dee Dee yelled at us to leave the dice alone. This wasn't rock, paper, scissors, he told us. Dungeons and Dragons was serious business. I told him he should be extra thankful to have us as friends, especially since he'd forgotten the Pringles. The doorbell rang. Dee Dee and I both looked at the clock. We had called the pizza only 10 minutes ago. Maybe Bench managed to weasel out a dinner, I said. Yeah, maybe, Dee Dee said. Wolf smiled as he stood up. From his seat, Dee Dee had the best angle of the front hall, and I watched his expression shift from curiosity to confusion. I spun around to see who was standing there, though I really should have guessed. Greetings, oh dungeony ones, Rose Holland called from the front door. I come bearing gifts. She held up a bag of Funyuns and a 2-liter of bargain brand red cream soda and smiled. Dee Dee's mouth hung open. I kept mine shut. Wolf took the snacks and gave Rose a hug, the second in 2 days that I'd seen. I wasn't sure you were going to make it, he said, escorting her into the kitchen. You kidding? Hanging out with the 3 world-class geekazoids like you on a Saturday night? How could a girl say no? I could think of approximately 300 girls at Branton Middle School who would have. They actually wouldn't have said no. They would have said, are you kidding? Or seriously? In fact, I couldn't think of a single other kid in the entire school who would have given the offer to sit around with the 3 of us and roll for saving throws a second thought. But Rose was obviously an exception. Is that the pizza guy? Wolf's mom called down the stairs. There was a pause. Wolf looked at the 2 of us as if he expected us to answer, but we were speechless. No, Mom, he called up. It's just a friend. It's important to keep some things to yourself. If Jaime Juarez could have kept his superfluous nipple a secret, I'm sure he would have. It would have saved him a lot of grief. Same goes for Catherine McKinney's habit of chewing on her toenails, or Daniel P's unfortunate long-standing history of bedwetting that earned him the name P. Diddley. That's what happens when people find out. Dungeons and Dragons was like that. Forget that half the kids in school probably went around slaying dragons and stashing loot on their PlayStations or iPads. It's different when you actually have to roll the dice. It's all about degrees. Mention you like to play board games and you're probably okay. Break out the monster manual and start talking about the difference between 5th edition and 4th edition rule sets. You might as well give up on ever getting a date to the 8th grade dance. That's why I was a little surprised to see Rose at the door. Dee Dee pulled Wolf aside, and the three of us had a quick huddle by the table. This isn't going to work, Dee Dee explained. You're all at level 7. If she comes in now, she'll throw everything off balance. She'll muck it all up. It was a good excuse. Much better than saying that Wolf had crossed the line, inviting someone else into our game without permission, someone who probably knew nothing about constitution checks and critical hits, someone who had to teach everything to. Lunch was one thing. This was different. I don't want to run your game, Rose said, eavesdropping. If it's a problem, I can just sit and watch. Sit and watch? Who in their right mind wants to sit and watch 3 guys play Dungeons and Dragons? It's not a problem, Wolf said, breaking the huddle prematurely. We'll just bump up your stats a little. You'll be fine, right, Dee Dee? Wolf and Dee Dee stared at each other. It was up to the dungeon master. It was Wolf's house, but it was Dee Dee's game. Wolf got to decide if she stayed. Dee Dee decided if she played. I was just glad neither of them was looking at me. She'll need to make a character, Dee Dee sighed, meaning that there were 4 of us playing, just like always, but not exactly. We took our seats around Wolf's scarred kitchen table, Rose between Wolf and me, but closer to him, and Dee Dee patiently explained the absolute least she had to know to get started, while I poured myself a cup of soda. You'll need to choose an avatar, Dee Dee told her. He had a whole trove of little plastic figures. He picked out the tallest, an orc war chief, hulking and muscular, holding a giant axe. Maybe this one, he said. Rose rifled through the box. Who is this little guy? She asked, holding up a short, pudgy-looking figure about half the size of the one Dee Dee held. That's a gnome, Dee Dee said. They are good at making things. Like origami, Wolf added. I'll be him then, Rose said. What's his name? You get to decide, I told her. You get to make up everything. Name, profession, backstory, all of it. It's the best part about it, really. At least I thought so. Of course, maybe that was just the poet talking. So you're saying I can pretty much be anything I want? Within reason, Wolf said, and within the roll of the dice, Dee Dee added. In that case, she said, setting the tiny plastic gnome in front of her, my name is Moose. We all looked at each other. You could hear the carbonation popping in our cups. I was no stranger to tense silences. I'd once witnessed my mother yelling at my father in the middle of a Walgreens loud enough for everyone waiting at the pharmacy to hear, including the guy waiting in the drive-thru. The quiet that followed that incident wasn't quite this awkward. Rose shrugged off our stares. What? You think I'm going to let some stupid little nickname get to me? Screw that. My name is Moose Wrathbringer, and I'm a spell-casting ninja with a history of carrying out covert assassinations for top-secret guilds or something. You can't do that, Ninja said. You can't be a spell-casting ninja. For starters, you're a gnome, and the stat requirements, plus the rules for multicasting, prohibit you to... He suddenly stopped talking, his mouth cinched tight, eyes bulging. Rose had reached out and taken his hand, just grabbed it from across the table. By the look on his face, you'd know that no girl had ever held Dee Dee's hand before. I watched his Adam's apple jump like he'd swallowed a grasshopper. It's all right, Dee Dee, Rose said softly. I can do it because you are the dungeon master, and you can do anything, which means I can be anything, even a spellcasting ninja gnome named Moose, because that's what this is all about. We don't always have to play by the rules. She let go, and Dee Dee seemed to relax, though he moved his hands to his lap and kept them there. Yeah, all right. he said, his voice catching. Wolf handed Rose some dice, and we created her character, deciding how strong and wise and smart she would be. Stronger, wiser, and smarter than the rest of you, she said with a grin. By the time Moose Wrathbringer was born, the pizza had arrived, and Wolf paid with the money his mother left on the counter. Equipped with a slice of greasy pepperoni and a magic katana, Rose yelled for us to get our adventure on! Okay, head over to Schoology.